Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to High Top Sports Oregon. We have a jam-packed show for you guys today. We're going to be talking about Oregon's highest recruiting class ever, absolute monster performance by Dan Lanning, closing out some big recruits at the end there, then hop into the transfer portal, what that has been, along as the scholarships that are available left for Oregon, and see how they're going to head into May, which will be the second portal cycle. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and introduce our Oregon insider here, ladies and gentlemen, Derek Zelmer. Derek, how you doing, man?
Hey, good man, good man. I'm excited to get into the stuff today.
Absolutely. Great show the other day with Jabbar Muhammad. I know Oregon fans were stoked about that commitment. So obviously some more things happening. You also had a big recruiting weekend, senior or junior weekend, was it called?
Yeah, tons of recruits on campus. I think the numbers came out to be close to 40, a number of high recruits. So yeah, pretty exciting stuff for Oregon recruiting going forward.
Big time stuff, big time weekend. I think this is the last little weekend that you can have before there's a little bit of a dead period in the beginning of February, and then obviously it'll heat back up. So a lot of schools are pumping some kids in to try to get some commits too. I think before this window closes, in a sense, it's that quarter one of recruiting. How can we head into quarter two with some momentum? But Dan Lanning and Oregon have showed to close very strong towards the end, regardless of how it starts. So I wouldn't be too worried about how quarter one closes. They've been shy. They have not been shy from closing from the last 2 years. So
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. He especially this 24 class here. It's like, we started out fairly strong, kind of died down a little bit toward the summertime, but man, to say he closed very well would be an understatement, I think.
look, I mean, it's so well. It was the number one recruiting class for Oregon of all time. So let's dive into that. It was a historic for Dan Lanning, and let's take a look at who you guys are able to close.
Yeah, absolutely. So just starting off with the first one, obviously, Elijah Rushing's one of the biggest names in the class of 24 here. He is a man who originally committed to the Arizona Wildcats. As we know, decommitted and jumped ship with Dan Lanning. But, one of the things that Dan talked about in terms of his recruiting is that he was kind of focused on the trenches here. And we know that's especially important kind of heading into Big Ten play. So landing Rushing was absolutely enormous. Big framed guy, has a very high motor, good in the run game, good in the pass game. So he's a dude we're really excited to get on campus. And same with Aiden Breland here. He's another one we were fighting Oklahoma for a while for his commitment. Ended up signing with Dan and the Ducks. Another guy who is just an elite run stopper. A couple guys have said arguably could be one of the best in the class of 24. So that was absolutely major stuff. Ify Badigwu, coming from the East Coast out of Maryland. He's one that the Ducks locked on very early on. Made it a priority, it seemed, to grab him in the secondary. He's a guy who, he's got a very high motor as well, big speed guy, creates lots of turnovers, heavy hitter. So he's one that we're really excited to. And I know there was a little smoke at the end of his recruitment cycle. People are saying, oh, he's one that could flip, especially, considering the D-back depth that we had going forward. Ended up sticking with the Ducks and signing. One of the ones I was most excited for, Jeremiah McClellan. Here's another guy who, he was an Ohio State commit. Everybody down to the wire figured, he was going to Ohio State. That was almost a foregone conclusion. That little last week before signing period, though, there were a couple Oregon insiders who were saying that, don't count us out quite yet. He was in contact with Dan Lanning all the way up to the wire, ended up flipping his commitment. And that's kind of one thing he talked about in his post signing interviews was the fact that Oregon, they stayed in contact the entire time. They respected his decision when he decided to go to Ohio State tentatively, but obviously hit the point where he decided that it was probably in his best interest for his future moving forward to sign with the Ducks, which is phenomenal. And the final man up there, Aaron Flowers, he's a guy who we kind of expect to see some playing time as a true freshman. He's a very high riser in terms of his recruiting rankings on multiple websites over the last 6 months, especially. Um, Big physical guy, big, can stop the run. Plays very well in the pass game. Obviously, had tons of top competition playing down in Texas. So he's one that we're really excited for. I think we're gonna get to see plenty of him, albeit with the amount of depth that Oregon signed being in the portal, and then just the young D-backs that they had coming in from last year as well.
Kudos to you for pronouncing Iffy's full name correctly. I would have just moved right on past it. So well done for sending it and knocking that out of the park. Jeremiah McClellan, that was a fun one to watch. We had our live show during that signing day, and that was a big time flip because obviously Jeremiah Smith, another big time Ohio State wide receiver commit, was also on flip watch. So Ohio State was in shambles up until that moment, and when he flipped, it's like, oh my goodness, we're about to lose everybody. And again, for Dan Lanning to go in there and rip that wide receiver out of what is becoming wide receiver U as of late with Brian Hartline there and headed into the Big Ten, it's a big win in that recruiting cycle. And like you mentioned, the highest recruiting class ever with 26 total commits, 21 4-stars with an average rating of 91.98. There's only classes higher than them are Georgia with 93, Bama with 92. But take that into consideration, Bama, they lost a handful of commits or recruits that are not being counted for the recruiting class. They lost their number one quarterback, Julian Sain, was a 5-star, Jameer Grimsley, and I believe maybe one or two more, but they were counted as transfers. So that class average has come down a little bit. Ohio State at 92.8, but they also had 4 less commits, so that plays a factor. Miami with 90. So only 5 schools ahead of you that had a higher rating. But with you guys landing 4 more commits than some of those guys too, you got to think that's going to affect the average. So a 91.98 with 26 commits is huge. That's a very healthy blue chip class put together by Dan Lanning. So record breaking for sure with a total score of 288 according to 247.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think back even like 10 years ago in the Chip Kelly days, Oregon and recruiting, they were far from a powerhouse nationally, right? We had multiple classes that finished in the 20s and the 30s. I believe we had a couple in the 40s even, going back to, the late 2000s, early 2010s. So it's like, for Oregon and their fans to see, what I would say Mario started. Mario is really the one who came in here and really put Oregon on the map in terms of a recruiting powerhouse. But yeah, man, I think Dan's really taken that to the next level. He's a widely known closer. It's like all the commits that we hear from post signing, they say the same thing. They're like, Dan's a very humble guy. He respects everything. He's a very personable guy and he's going to tell you exactly like it is. We're kind of in the day and age where if a coach goes into a house and says, hey, sign, come sign with me for the next 4 years, that might not hold a lot of merit. As we've seen from a couple Washington commits when Kalen DeBoer dipped for Bama. That's one of the things they said. And, obviously in the video Dan released, he said, if you're scared your coach is leaving, come play for us. And man, he's holding
Oh,
his word true. So yeah,
loved it.
beyond great, man.
What an opportunity to take advantage of that and recruit while everything is in mayhem. You take an opportunity to keep the ball rolling and get the word out there. Look, I'm excited to see what Oregon's able to do. I think being in the Big Ten, it's going to play a big factor, especially with how the conferences are aligning. It really feels like it's going to be SEC and Big Ten and then everybody else. So kids are going to want to go play. I think the Pac-12 was honestly getting in the way of Oregon in a weird way, just given the conference standard and what it was living up to. It just didn't really have the hype. Now this past year, obviously playing a national championship, it definitely grew, but it's kind of been definitely in the lower tier for the last few years and hasn't looked what we thought what it should be. Had the respect that it probably should have. Now we are also going to talk about the transfer portal class, which was a phenomenal transfer portal class. So in complement to the recruiting class, I mean, boy oh boy, we got into it a little bit with our Jabbar Muhammad commit, but we'll break that down some more. Before we do that, though, let's talk about the big time again. Recruits for junior weekend headed into this. Obviously, this is for 2025. Talk all about them.
Yeah, so in terms of the junior weekend, as you kind of alluded to earlier, this is one of the last big weekends where Oregon's able to host. And, they went out with a bang, bringing in near 40 recruits this weekend. And, starting off with Akili Smith Jr. This is a legacy player for Oregon, knowing his dad was an Oregon Duck, ended up playing for the Cincinnati Bengals in his NFL career. Very, number 6 overall QB in this class. And this is one I'm personally excited for. It's just the intangibles that he brings to the game and his tape. Being down here in Southern California, we hear all about him as well. So I'm really excited to get him on campus. But he kind of led the way in terms of player engagement this weekend, trying to smooth some of these recruits. Another one is De'Aaron Hill, the number 5 running back in this class. He was on campus this weekend. This is one where Oregon's been in contact a lot as of recently. We've kind of heard a lot about him. He's another fast riser out of the state of Illinois. And then Deshaun Brame, he is a guy out of Kansas, a tight end, big body, big frame, who Oregon actually landed a couple crystal balls this weekend to get him. Um, Tight end's kind of a position of need going forward. Oregon on their roster, they got Kenyon Sadiq, who, he was the number one player out of the state of Idaho, big tight end recruit. But in terms of the depth and the younger classes, that's not something I would say is a strong suit necessarily. That's not a diss on Oregon's tight end room by any stretch. It's just going forward, that's something they needed to address. And I think they're doing very well trying to get him locked in with the Ducks. And then arguably the biggest one this weekend is Fahim Delane, the number one safety in the 25 class. They were able to get him in class out of, in the campus this weekend. He's one where the Ducks are highly prioritizing him. They've been in contact with him for a while. Obviously, being the number one safety in the class he can damn near pick his school that he's going to end up going to. But it is big to get him on campus, especially this weekend. From everything I've seen, great visit. One that I know they were really hoping to stay in contact with and hopefully get him on visit for another official visit later in the year. But yeah, junior weekend this weekend, supposedly it's been a success. I know obviously they're going to say that coming out of Eugene, but yeah, from everything I've seen from the players, social media, the insiders, the coaches, it looks like it was a very successful weekend on the recruiting trail. Are you still there? I think we lost you.
I'm muted. I was trying to talk about the size of your quarterbacks. So that I was talking about the quarterback size again, 6'5", 200, a ton of size there. Your tight end, I expect him to move up probably in the top 100. So out of these four players, 3 out of the 4 in the top 100 right now. And then of course your tight end at 134, and then the safety 6'2", 195. So and then the tight end 6'6". So a lot of size there this weekend. And if you're able to close on all those guys, that should be a big time move there. So look, I think something what Dan's done a great job in is if gets them on campus, seems to do a pretty good job of closing them. So we'll see how this big weekend plays out, and we'll see. We'll have to come back and check the stats and see how successful Dan Lanning was on this first big junior day. And we'll continue to monitor big time recruiting weekends as the season goes on. Now, last up we have here, which again we've already talked about it, the big time commit in Jabbar Muhammad. So I've got it pulled up here. 247 has you ranked third overall for just the transfer portal class with 11 commits and an average rating of 9.45. So Ole Miss and A&M sit in front of you, but they had to flip over their entire class. Ole Miss with 17, A&M with 23. So their average rating is lower than yours. So out of the top 10, I believe you guys have one of the highest rated class. Ohio State has another higher class as well. But man, Dan Lanning with 11 commits with an average rating of 90.45 on top of that recruiting class of a 91.4. Dan's cooking.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And after last year, people were very anxious about the transfer portal. I know it kind of started off a little slow for the Ducks in terms of, getting guys on board. But man, you want to talk about quality. Obviously just starting with the big ones at the quarterback position, Lanning, Dylan Gabriel, who we expect to take over for Bo Nix. Had a phenomenal year last year in terms of completion percentage, in the top half of the country. Phenomenal. And then, another big storyline was grabbing Dante Moore, too, who was a one-time Oregon Duck commit last year before flipping to UCLA. But just to, solidify that QB room and kind of have that experience as well. Dylan Gabriel, obviously, he has a chance to break Bo Nix's record, ironically enough, for most games started in a collegiate career.
Wow.
Dante Moore, he saw some serious playing time last year. I know he's split some time with a couple other QBs in the UCLA room, but as a true freshman, seeing some playing time at a P5 school, one like UCLA, and especially we know how tough the competition in the Pac was last year. So we're definitely excited to have them on board and kind of see how he develops going forward. And then another guy that I don't think gets talked about a whole lot just because he's definitely an unknown name is Jay Harris, the running back out of Northwest Missouri State, D2 program. But mind you, he was a D2 Heisman finalist last year. He had over 1,400 yards. I think he had like 15 touchdowns last year. The dude is just highly efficient when he catch it or when he's touching the ball. I would say the one downside of him where it doesn't necessarily jive 100% with a Will Stein offense is he doesn't catch the ball a whole lot. I wouldn't necessarily consider him a threat out of the backfield in terms of receptions. I think he had like 30 some total yards last year. But with that being said, I mean, Oregon's the current state of their running back room is deep. Last year Jordan James averaged 7 yards a carry, who was our backup running back to Bucky Irving, obviously heading to the NFL. So we're really excited about that one. And then the other big name splash was Evan Stewart, right? He's a dude who was highly coveted once he hit the transfer portal. We knew that he was going to get a lot of attention just being, he was a freshman All American, 5+ star. Um, Once again, probably another dude who damn near could have picked his destination. Fortunately, Dan Lanning, Will Stein, that offensive coaching room was able to stay in contact, get him on campus nice and early for one of his visits. And then, kind of the entire time throughout his recruiting process, it was known that Oregon was one of the favorites, if not the favorite. And we're fortunate enough to lock him down. So, he's a wonderful addition to a wide receiver room that has plenty of experience, plenty of talent. So, the weapons that Dylan Gabriel is going to have on the outside are it's like something that we haven't seen in a long time being Oregon fans. And then heading to the defensive side of the ball, another one is Jamari Caldwell, the defensive lineman out of Houston. Right, he was a second team All Big 12 guy last year. I think he had 6.5 sacks. He's dude who kind of fills an immediate need for Dan Lanning and the defensive line. We know going into the Big Ten, that's something that they want to prioritize. But yeah, he's definitely a plug up the middle, and we're really excited to have him up there. Just because I would argue that's probably the one position group where we're not 100% comfortable with where we sit. Once again, that's not to say that what we have is not talented and we couldn't trust him. It's just more so of what have you actually put on the field? We have a lot of young guys in the defensive line room, so to have somebody like Jamari come in right away and be a plug and play starter is absolutely massive for the defense. And then, just heading into the secondary, that's another thing that Oregon hit hard. Obviously, yesterday with Jabbar Muhammad committing, that's absolutely massive. But I think people forget about Cam Alexander. He's a UTSA transfer, all conference guy, Frisco Bowl MVP for his team. He's a blanket out there. He's a guy where, I mean, when you're going to UTSA, you don't have a lot of people who know who you are necessarily, but I think Oregon Duck fans are going to get to know and love him real quick. What he puts on tape is it's something I'm beyond excited about. And then, heading into the back half of it with Kobe Savage, another guy who was a second team All Big 12 guy 2 years in a row, actually. He fills another immediate need with Tysheem Johnson likely sliding back to that one deep as well. So it's like what they've addressed in the transfer portal really solidifies a whole bunch of their needs. And it's something where I think myself and a lot of other Ducks fans are really comfortable with heading forward.
Look, I think a few things. Dante Moore is a massive pickup, given the fact, and what it also shows to you is that, look, recruiting to the very end is huge, because next year they could become yours once again. And he played a little bit at UCLA. I was very shocked because, again, with Dylan Gabriel, he knows he's sitting behind him. That's how great of a relationship that Dan Lanning created with Dante Moore. He's like, look, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, because that was a last-minute flip from Oregon to UCLA just 2 years ago. I remember that being a big-time blow. I was like, wow, that was a huge loss, but ended up getting their guy anyways. It all worked out. And then I don't know if people know, but Evan Stewart is absolutely massive from Texas A&M. His first 2 years, freshman year, he went for 649 yards with 2 touchdowns, and then last year, 514 with 4 touchdowns. May not seem like it's a big splash off the numbers page, but A&M has been going through some struggles. They had a new offensive coordinator this year. Jimbo Fisher was calling the plays the year before that. So they've been in shambles, and now obviously Jimbo's gone. So Evan Stewart hasn't necessarily had the most steady home for the last 2 years, and he's still out there doing those things. I can only imagine what he is going to do in the offense with Dylan Gabriel and Dan Lanning. It's going to be exciting to watch alongside some of those guys that you picked up in the recruiting class as well. Phenomenal job putting this class together. The reason why we're doing this, the reason we're talking about it, I love me Dan Lanning, and it's exciting to watch. I'm glad I get to pick your brain and talk to you about it so often. I think what we're going to have to do too, Derek, is give them a breakdown of where the defensive line was, where the secondary was last year, and where it is now with all these updates, because just you got a whole new facelift, especially on that secondary with cornerbacks and safety play. That's going to be exciting to see what is to come for the Oregon Ducks.
Yeah, I mean, starting with the D line, obviously, I think the biggest hole is losing Brandon Dorlus, who's been an absolute staple on that defensive line for the Ducks over the last few years. Projects to be a fairly high draft pick in the NFL, so it definitely hurt losing someone like him. But something that not a lot of people are talking about is the importance of bringing back Jordan Birch on that defensive line. So if you remember, a former five-star recruit, played at South Carolina a little bit, had a couple good years there, but his year with the Ducks, he was phenomenal. Big plug on the defensive line, big bodied man, can move some bodies for sure. It's just what we have going forward. Had he not come back, is we have a lot of inexperience, right? So we have guys like Amari Washington, who, in my opinion, is going to be a great foundation going forward. But it's players like that where we don't really have a good grasp on exactly what they're bringing to the table, just because they haven't been able to, put that on film, be in some of these high pressure situations that we're expecting to see this year. Um, you know, if we weren't able to address that via the portal with a guy like Jamare Caldwell, I would be a little bit nervous, just once again because we don't know exactly what we got. So the defensive line still to this point is my biggest question mark personally. Some people may disagree with that. That's kind of where my head's at currently. I think so far they've done a fairly good job addressing that. It's just, once we hit late August, early September, we're going to find out exactly what we got there. And, I trust the defense. I trust that entire team. I trust the coaching staff to put out the best product possible. But if I had to pick an area of concern, I would say that's probably where I would start. And then, yeah, the secondary, it's, losing Kyrie Jackson was a big blow coming in just because, he was our CB1 all year, very consistent throughout the year. He was a guy that the Ducks defense was able to lean on a little bit in that secondary, and we didn't exactly know how we were going to replace him. I know there was a lot of thought that Jaleel Florence was going to slide from, CB2 to the one spot, just being another young guy. I think Dan's and company's kind of taken a lot of pressure off of him heading into year 2 as a starter. Obviously, with the addition of Cam Alexander, Brandon Johnson from Duke, he's going to slide in that nickel spot, but he be in that defensive back room. And then obviously Jabbar Muhammad, who is someone we think is going to immediately come in and take Kyrie's spot. Someone where just based off of what he did on the field last year and actually the last 2 years, I'm pretty confident in him. And then, people, because of that, people seem to forget what they have behind him too. Oregon did sign the number 1 cornerback in the JUCO system this year. And it's just the amount of depth they have in the secondary is exactly what we would need to feel comfortable heading into Big Ten play. So it's like the secondary is not one I'm necessarily concerned about. There is a ton of depth. There's a ton of experience, a ton of proven talent there. So that's great. The linebacking room is another one where they were able to bring back a couple bodies, Jeffrey Bassa and Justin Jacobs specifically. Those are 2 dudes who got some serious playing time. There's a ton of talent there. Jeffrey Bassa has been around the program for, a number of years now. Justin Jacobs, a transfer from Iowa as of last year, started out the year injured, so he didn't play a whole lot early in the season, but, as the year went on, came on fairly strong, became a pretty solid staple there in the linebacking group. So I think I'm pretty comfortable where we sit with everything, just being the transfer portal, the development that's taking place on the defensive side of the ball, and then the proven talent that we have had coming back. It makes me feel pretty confident going forward.
Love it. I mean, it's going to be some exciting stuff. And again, guys, if you guys are just joining us and enjoying this content, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe. We're going to be dropping videos almost every single week. I don't know how many yet, but we're going to get ramped up. It's obviously a little bit slow right now, but we'll definitely ramp up heading into the summer. And then, of course, when football season's here, hopefully we'll be on your TV screens every single day. So be sure to smash the like button, subscribe. Hope you guys are enjoying this type of content. If you guys have any ideas or thoughts of what you would like to see, let us know down in the comments. Until next time, I am Shelton.
And I'm Derek. Look forward to seeing you guys again.
See you guys.